Our richest clients are obsessed with banking in Singapore because it gives them security, diversification, and access to some of the best banks on the planet. But opening a Singaporean bank account is nearly impossible, especially if you're from Europe or the Americas. So in this video, I'm going to reveal a secret strategy that I've never heard anyone else share before. It's a way to open accounts in Singapore for you or your company, even if you're from one of these restricted countries. Now, just to be clear, you still need to meet account opening requirements. I'm talking money, supporting documents, and going through the standard onboarding process. The exact same process you'd expect from any Singaporean bank. In fact, the only difference is that instead of being denied when you apply because of your country of residence, you're going to get approved. But there is a catch. In fact, there are 3 catches, and I'm going to tell you about the first one right now, and then I'll share the other 2 in a couple minutes. So catch number 1 is if you open this account, you will be expected to invest. But that shouldn't be a problem, since most people opening in Singapore are doing so to diversify a portion of their wealth, which typically means they want to stay invested. Now, there's 2 ways that you can do this. The first way is what we'll call the entity approach, and the second way is the personal approach. Now, the entity approach isn't referring to operating entities. So if you have a Hong Kong company that's sourcing widgets from China and selling them to customers in the US, this strategy is not going to work for you. Instead, it's for holding companies that are strictly being used to invest, including offshore entities like a BVIBC, a UAE free zone company, a Singapore or Hong Kong company, basically any standard company that you'd expect to be using for holding purposes. Now, you're probably wondering how much you're going to need to deposit to open one of these accounts, which is a really good question, and I'm going to tell you in a second. But first, I want to tell you about the personal approach, because there's an important caveat here. You see, while almost anyone can open an account in Singapore using an entity, one nationality in particular won't be able to open personal accounts using this approach: Americans. But don't worry, because if you are an American and you really want to open an offshore bank account in Singapore, you can still use the entity approach to make that happen. All right, now let's talk about money. So in most cases, if you're a foreign non-resident looking to open a premier bank account in Singapore, you're going to be looking at between 270,000 and 350,000 Singapore dollars, roughly 200 to 270,000 USD. And that's a pretty standard deposit size for most premier banking options. And when you consider the fact that you're going to be accessing really high caliber banks in one of the best managed countries on the planet, that's a pretty reasonable request. Now, you're probably expecting this special strategy to require a significantly higher deposit, which would make sense since it's offering so much flexibility in terms of who can go ahead and open an account. But the deposit is exactly the same, 350,000 Singapore dollars, which is the same amount you'll need to deposit if you open with any of the big banks in Singapore: DBS, OCBC, UOB. So just to recap, the deposit's the same. You can open for yourself or your holding company, and basically anyone can use this approach to bank in Singapore. It kind of feels too good to be true, right? Well, depending on your goals, it might be, or it might be exactly what you're looking for. And I'm going to explain why in a second. But first, let's talk about how to actually open the account. Because in roughly 98% of the cases that we handle, maybe even 99% of the cases, our clients, they open accounts from the comfort of their home, 100% remotely. And that's because we want people to be able to cut down on the cost of travel, the time that it takes to open accounts, and even get comfortable managing their accounts from abroad. But every so often, a bank will require you to show up in person to open your accounts. It's not nearly as common as it used to be, but it does still happen. And this is catch number 2. If you want to use this approach to open a bank account in Singapore, keeping in mind that for many of you, this might be your only option, you will need to show up in person. So again, catch number 1 is that you need to invest. And catch number 2 is that you need to open the account in person. Now, there's still a third catch, which I'm about to share with you, but first I want you to take a look at this list. This is a list of the other countries where you can open offshore and international accounts with similar or lower deposits as a resident of Europe or the Americas, and in many cases, including the United States. And I'm showing you this because I want you to know that even though Singapore is a really good option for banking, it's not the only option. And in many cases, we don't think it's the best option for our clients, which is why we share all of the account opening options to our clients before they decide where they're going to open accounts. And if you want us to tell you which countries you qualify to bank in, you can click the link in the description below and fill out the free assessment. And we'll just tell you where you can open for free. Okay, so now the third catch. And this one is all about transfers. You see, if you open this account, you can't send or receive money to or from third parties. So you can't pay suppliers, no receiving payments from customers, no sending money to your third cousin in Alabama. You can only receive or withdraw funds to yourself. And the reason for this is pretty simple. You're not opening a current account or a checking account. Instead, you're opening an investment account. And this is actually the same thing that you can expect when opening a private bank account in places like Switzerland. They restrict transfers to and from third parties, though Swiss banks do tend to be a little bit more flexible. Now, just to be clear, you can still have a cash account to hold different currencies, and you'll also have an investment account to invest through the bank. Plus, you'll be banking in one of the best jurisdictions on the planet. But how can you actually go ahead and open this account? Well, step number 1 is you need to qualify. Here's what that looks like. First up, your residency. You can't live in a sanctioned or high-risk country. So that's going to cut out Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, a big chunk of Africa, and a few CBI passports as well. Second, your citizenship. You can't have a blacklisted or high-risk citizenship. And like I said, if you're an American, you can't qualify directly. You'll need to use a holding company instead. Third, if you want to use a holding company, you should use a standard jurisdiction of registration. Nothing too exotic like Vanuatu or Seychelles. And next, you need to be ready to deposit at least 350,000 Singapore dollars. And like I mentioned, you'll need to conduct an in-person meeting with the bank in Singapore. And just to be clear, while we can help most clients open accounts in Singapore remotely, if you want to open this account, you will need to show up in person. And then finally, you'll need to pass standard compliance, KYC, and bank onboarding due diligence. Now, I can't stress this enough. Not all clients need to use this strategy to open a Singapore bank account. Lots of people can and do still open in Singapore 100% remotely without any restrictions at all, especially clients who live in Asia, even as a foreigner. But if you don't live in Asia and you're from Europe, Canada, the US, or most of Latin America, then this is the strategy you should be looking to use if you want to open here. Now, if you don't like the restrictions of this account or you don't want to show up in person, I suggest you consider a different jurisdiction instead. A place that our team likes just as much as Singapore from a banking perspective, and where the regulators are arguably even more proactive. And it's also a place where almost anyone, including Americans, can open offshore bank accounts with reputable international banks 100% remotely with very reasonable deposits, even lower deposits than what banks in Singapore require. And I'm going to tell you exactly which country I'm talking about in this video right here. So give that a click and I'll see you over there right now.